What you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences. And I've always sort of found you would see things that you would not automatically have come across.
Hello and welcome to the Parliamentary Review Podcast, the podcast that has a soft spot for raising standards. I'm Matthew O'Neill, and in each episode I'm joined by directors, CEOs, CFOs, government ministers, chairmen, and chairwomen. The aim is to discover who these people are, the people who get up each morning and make Britain work. We discuss the innovation that leads to success in this country, and we also get their take on the current political and economic state of the nation. Later on in this episode, you have the chance to hear Jonathan White's exclusive interview with Lord Pickles, former Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government and Chairman of the Conservative Party, and of course current co-chairman of the Parliamentary Review. But for now, we're joined by Matthew Ballinger, Chief Executive of FuseMetrix Group. Matthew, hello.
Hello.
Well, thank you for coming on the program today. So it's been a few months since FuseMetrix Group appeared in the Parliamentary Review. What has happened in business in the ensuing months?
Well, obviously, given the exposure we had in there in the Parliamentary Review, that did help us with, particularly from a marketing point of view, with our international growth. Because obviously with the Brexit, I've said Brexit already so early in the talk.
Well, it's better than the other thing that we're going to be talking about as well. So,
well, exactly. Well,
the days that we missed when we were just talking about Brexit.
Exactly. Well, over the last year of with Brexit on the horizon and a certain amount of uncertainty, we look to expand our horizons a little bit into other export opportunities. Our solution that we offer is a web-based business operating system, if you like, a system that allows you to run your company in one platform. And so it allows us really to sell that anywhere where we can meet the accounting rules. So, because the idea behind our platform is essentially one database and everything goes in it, from accounts to HR to emails and diaries and project sales, or everything you can think of, stock management and so on. We ended up looking to places like Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and saying, well, okay, look, we don't know what's going to be happening in Europe, and although ultimately we think that everything will end up being absolutely fine and we'll all be friends and neighbours again, there is going to be a turbulent time perhaps, and we'll concentrate on markets that we already have a sort of a clear relationship with that's unlikely to change. So over the past year, we've essentially managed to change from having sort of no clients really overseas, apart from in predominantly France, where we have a number of clients, to now over 9% of our income comes now from Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. So it's been quite a big shift just to try and diversify where our revenues are coming from. And the other thing that's happened in our business since then is we seem to have found a bit of a niche. Whereas, whilst our systems could be implemented in pretty much any company, we've found a bit of a niche in the leisure industry, particularly with companies that require specialist booking systems for quite often for leisure activities that have a risk element, because companies obviously now wanting to tie back to have customers signing waivers and various other things, and we've implemented that within our point of sale system and leisure booking systems, and that's what's really allowed us to take a definite defined product rather than a customizable product on a per sale basis to a broader market.
Now, of course, a lot of time has passed since FuseMetrix Group emerged from the primordial ooze of its creation in 2002. What was the market like at that period in time?
Well, it was very different to now because we were very early adopters of the concept of having everything run from the cloud. So we started out back in 2002, essentially talking to people who had no idea what we were talking about. So we'd created this sort of software platform that ran in your web browser, and was and saying, "Oh, this will run your accounts, and you can run your accounts in the cloud." Or it wasn't called the cloud then, but a hosted application that you could run your business within. People looked at us like we were mad. Because that market didn't exist. You didn't have, the big players like Salesforce or some of these other sort of providers that have now made it pretty much the standard thing that you do everything on a sort of renting your software basis rather than buying stuff. So we were that was a very interesting sort of start point. In that we were trying to sort of create a market, but we were a tiny company trying to do that, and it's taken really. We got overtaken obviously by the big boys, if you like, with big deep pockets to create that market. Although we were there, many years before a lot of them. From an accounting products point of view, Sage obviously were the big known name for a long time, and then they got. Then you had Xero come along, who everything was in the cloud, and Sage looked a bit left behind, although now they've also brought forward another accounting product. But it's taken brands like those that people, particularly the SME market, would be very familiar with, to create that market properly and make it a normal thing to do. Now it's never questioned what we do, but I think that was the biggest challenge really from our point of view back in the day was that we were always trying to create. We were constantly having to explain what we were doing. So there's been a massive shift from in people's kind of view of what is now normal. But the thing is, we were always trying to explain this as being the computer evolution has sort of gone full cycle. Because if you go back to the earlier days of computing, you had your mainframe in your office, your factory, or whatever you had, and the old green screen dumb terminals. Then we all went to sort of move forward into the sort of client server model with Microsoft Windows Server and so on. And then we all started having laptops and mobile devices, and suddenly there was data scattered all over the place on various people's different machines. And now businesses are now sort of pulling all of that back, so they've got control of the business data in their centralized systems. And that's effectively what I see the modern software as a service sort of business application is effectively the mainframe of or the new mainframe, if you like, and the web browser is the dumb terminal, the replacement of the green screen. So we have, I think, seen computers go that sort of full cycle, and we're back to the same concepts we had at the very start.
Well, that's a very interesting concept to think that everything, not to get too philosophical, but it does seem to go rather full circle. I mean, we started off with glass bottles. We seem to be going back to glass bottles and paper straws and so on and so forth. So it's, hold on to those, clogs. They're going to come back into style at some point. Now, of course, coronavirus has been dominating things as of late, and we will get to it. But before we do, we have now left the European Union. Have you seen any impact on that decision within your business since that came into effect?
As yet, no. But then I think we wouldn't really expect to in this transition period. And we obviously don't know whether that transition period, given the coronavirus, which we will come to, whether that will then force or be used as an excuse to extend that transition period. I rather suspect it will do. And again, so I wouldn't really expect yet to see any great changes. But I think in the immediate short term, but we are still being approached by potential clients from Europe. And I think everyone's that we've spoken to is just taking the view of somewhere or another we'll make this work. So there's quite a pragmatic attitude. I mean, we're talking to some companies in Germany and France, and we're just saying, well, somehow or another we'll make it work, and I think that's always what we felt would happen to some degree, is the markets would largely sort themselves out. Obviously, we're in a very specific niche field, we're selling effectively an online service. So it may be, I would suspect it may be very, very different for people in other industries. But it'd be very interesting to see what what the long-term effects will be. I mean, there could be some great positives, but I suspect at the moment with the manufacturing businesses and so on, I think we'll probably be suffering quite significantly. But I honestly don't know. I can only speak about our own experience, really.
Well, speaking of the long-term effects on the market, how do you think the market for cloud computing is going to change over the next 10, 15 years?
I think it's going to become more and more dominated by a handful of key players. I mean, already it's heavily dominated by Amazon with their AWS cloud computing platform, and Microsoft Azure being the big competitor, I suppose. I think what will happen, there will be a great deal more applications that are effectively built and hosted on those platforms. But I suspect over time, a lot of those, the applications that gather big subscribers will get swallowed up by those big players who are likely to buy up those applications. So it's again back to it's almost like social media and so on, where people, the bigger companies were just buying up all of the content creators or the people that they got the users. I rather suspect we'll go through that same game again, where the big platform owners want to own all the content because they've got all the money, essentially.
So a further centralization is in the cards.
That would be my best guess at this stage. Yeah.
Now, of course, you focus primarily in the leisure sector, which is now, due to the current outbreak of the coronavirus, taking a major hit. The government's now encouraging social distancing. Attractions are closing. What do you think government contingency plans for the leisure sector should look like at this period in time?
What we're hearing from clients at the moment is that at this very moment in time, there is not a definite you must close. There is we would advise effectively, and we advise you to close, which is leaving companies in a quandary, because they're looking at their insurance and saying, well, if we're forced to close, we may have some way of covering our costs, perhaps through insurance, but where it's you probably should close or recommend you close, then they haven't got that ability. So that would then be their choice to close.
Of course.
And so I think that those clients that I've spoken to are very concerned that there isn't an absolute clear decision about what they should what they must do. I think if they felt they were compelled to do something, so then I think it'd be very different. So speaking to a client in Paris yesterday, who have a big attraction in the centre of Paris, they've actually been compelled to shut for a month. Mm-hmm. They were told a couple of days ago that their attraction was closed. Period. So that's. I think that gave them a great deal more certainty, and I think that's their biggest worry, is that people are not being told. These attractions are staying open largely here at the moment, but they're really seeing, because there's very few sort of people coming through the doors. People are obviously very nervous. They're being asked for there's lots of cancellations coming in and so on. So I think it could be an absolute decimation of bookings across the sector, which will ultimately lead to people looking at their staffing levels. I would suspect quite a lot of staffing reductions across the industry. I mean, I think from a government's point of view, which was really your question, I think that at the moment there is just a lack of absolute clarity, and that's what's causing the majority of their concerns, because they don't know exactly which way to turn.
So, in other words, the government should just pull the trigger on mandatory closures to resolve the issues in the market.
I think that's right. I think they've got to bite the bullet and say pull the trigger. And we're seeing it for much larger venues, with gatherings of 5,000 or more and so on. So lots of rock, music venues and things being closed and so on. But it's these smaller family-operated businesses, which is a huge proportion of the UK leisure industry, is family-owned attractions, and these are the people who are probably ultimately most vulnerable long-term to the financial impact of this virus.
Well, of course, you have other attraction-based industries such as National Trust or English Heritage that the majority of their staffing comes through volunteers. And of course, it would cost them much less to shut down than a commercial attraction, whether it be a small family-run attraction or a larger, much more commercial attraction. Do you believe that there needs to be a guideline system in place for the next pandemic when this happens again?
Very much so. I mean, things that we've done here, within our own businesses, we've actually, as part of preparations for this, we actually changed our phone systems to be entirely cloud-based. We've made other preparations. We've put teams at home predominantly, and we're using video conferencing and so on. So we've created our business sort of continuity plan for this. We had it for many other scenarios that we hope we never have to actually action. But again, we never really thought about a pandemic really being a serious thing that would happen to the degree that we've seen this country and others go into this almost lockdown state. And so we now have a proper action plan for should this happen again. And I think this is exactly what's going to happen across the rest of the industry. We need to, and I rather suspect that now we've done this once, governments will not think. It will be far more likely to do the same or similar thing again, as we have. No doubt we will have. There seems to be some new virus that's going to kill us all every year or two, with SARS or Ebola or something. Every year that we're all the media is full of, and does spread around the globe to a degree. I rather suspect that we're going to be seeing this again every few years.
Now, that actually brings up quite a good point. Of course, we want people to be safe. We want sensible precautions to be taken. But oftentimes, situations like this are sometimes exploited by governments to increase government authority. During the period of the emergency, you see an expansion of government authority in this sort of region. And then when it's over, it contracts, but not all the way back. So you end up with a larger regulatory state at the end of one of these things than you started out with. Do you feel that this could be a threat to civil liberties in the future?
It may well be, and I think there is an argument that we've gone through a period of absolute chaos politically, as have a number of other countries in the world, and that what people cry out for ultimately is rules. And I think that given that this, the governments now are obviously, taking far more control over people's lives under the guise of this particular action. You're absolutely right. I think that they will give back most controls, but not all, and that could be a little creep of power. But people, I think, ultimately are saying, well, they like control and order. And so when it's given back to them mostly, I think people will go, oh, that's great, we're all back to normal. But actually there's now, as you say, more power and control from the centre, which possibly may bring back some stability to the political system, but obviously long term that's sort of leading down the road of a more sort of totalitarian society, which is probably not desirable.
Indeed. Now, of course, you manage a close-knit team, and I'm sure they're the secret to your success. But how have they adapted to these changes in the market, be it data protection, Brexit, or coronavirus? Has this been a difficult challenge to adapt to?
I think it's certainly we have quite a workforce that is fairly split between very technical people and very outgoing people. Are kind of more our customer care team, our sales team, and so on. From the development team point of view, they are typical software developers. I used to be one, so I can say this, but they'd be quite happy if I stuck them in a dark room with no windows and a computer and bought them a pizza every day, in the nicest possible way. They actually kind of like being isolated, largely speaking, and so this sort of coronavirus thing, they're quite happy if I say, "Oh, work at home," and they'll, great, okay, brilliant. Whereas the sales teams are more so, the customer care, sales, marketing, and so on. They're wanting to be out, interacting with people, visiting people, and they're now sort of at home, and we're having to putting in video meeting, video conference calls and things between them, just so they've got that sort of social interaction that they would normally otherwise have by being out and about on the road or on the calls. In our customer care phone lines have virtually stopped ringing, which is, we've got a number of people sitting here sort of to answer the phone and no calls. And so it is going to be an interesting time as we work out the best way of keeping people safe and maybe isolate. Sending them, we sent obviously about half our workforce and asked them to work at home with the view that we may then swap them over, because I mean this is the thing we're not sure about is how long this is going to go on for. Any kind of serious social distancing, I suspect, probably 4 weeks or more. So at the moment we've got half our team at home working, and the intention is that after 14 days of them being effectively isolated, that we will then swap over the teams. Just because I think people are going to go stir crazy, or at least a percentage of them are going to go stir crazy, just sort of not having that social interaction of being with people. A lot of we've got a lot of young or people living on their own, single people living on their own, and if we send them home, there's an argument, a chance they're not going to see anybody physically for a month. That can't be good for anybody.
Well, of course, there are going to be restrictions. And another restriction that we've seen come up is data protection, of course. How have you seen the market change with relation to data protection? That obviously informs and influences what customers want from a software product. But would you say it's a high priority for everyone FuseMetrix works with?
I think, largely speaking, they... I think there was a lot of heightened awareness by consumers following the sort of GDPR regulations coming on stream, and we put in place systems to make it very easy for our customers to manage that data and allow their customers to manage their own data. So it's become less of an issue of people wanting to know exactly what data's held. We've made it available for them so they can see this is exactly what we hold for you and so on. So we've tried to take the sting out of it for our customers where possible, but largely speaking, I think it's sort of seen as I think the current regulations perhaps a little heavy-handed and weighted too heavily in towards largely to the consumer, because it's actually put an increased burden on business to support requests for information and so on. Whereas ultimately, these customers are customers of that business and have made some purchase, and it becomes a bit of a challenge to manage what is the legitimate business requirement for me to hang on to this data, even if a customer asks for it to be deleted and so on, because you've got a duty to keep accounting records and so on and so forth. And so I think there was a lot of muddy water in there that still some time down the line here from GDPR coming in, where actually most I think a lot of businesses don't really know what the rules are.
Do you believe GDPR was a mistake?
Largely, yes. I think it was overkill, and I think the rules we had in place already in the UK, specifically, in particular, I don't know about other countries, but certainly in the UK, I think the situation we had in place was already pretty effective.
Mm. Well, I think there is a lot of misinterpretation around GDPR as well, especially amongst the general public. Because it has become this kind of magic word. You get emails all the time, do the GDPR, blah, blah, blah. It does seem to be one of those kind of catch-all laws that seems to be applied everywhere. Do you think there will be an effort once we finish the transition period to roll some of this GDPR regulation back?
The government's like rolling back anything. I don't know. I think it wouldn't be a bad idea to do that, but whether there is really the political will to stir it up again, I don't know. I think largely as you say, the consumer generally is quite misinformed about what GDPR actually is there to do, and as you say, it's used as a weapon and a threat to deal with an unrelated complaint regularly.
Yes, indeed.
And so I think that and a lot of businesses are very scared of it. Whereas actually, if they've got appropriate, good, proper records and audit trails of what they've done with customer data, then they've really got nothing to fear.
Yeah, well, it seems to have become the new "you're violating my human rights" sort of rallying cry. But people are on the whole sensible, and I think this too will pass out of fashion into the next great war cry. But that being said, unfortunately, our time together has drawn to its close. But it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, Matthew, and please do stay healthy. And I look forward to speaking with you again.
And you, Matt. Thank you very much. It's been a joy talking with you.
Thank you. I hope that you all enjoyed our chat with Matthew Ballinger, especially learning more about the challenges facing the sector and how the whole team at FuseMetrix Group are continuing to raise standards. And now, if you haven't heard it before, it's Jonathan White's exclusive interview with the Parliamentary Review co-chairman, Lord Pickles. Lord Pickles served as Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government in David Cameron's cabinet before receiving a peerage in 2018. Lord Pickles remains active as the United Kingdom's anti-corruption champion and the country's special envoy for post-Holocaust issues, as well as being a keen vexologist. That's flags to you and I. And now, Jonathan White's exclusive interview with Lord Pickles.
Lord Pickles, thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Now, I'm sure you won't mind me reminding the listeners that you've been involved in politics, both local and national, for quite a number of decades. Indeed, before the days we were in the common market. Given your experience over those years, what thoughts have you had over the last few weeks and months about the current political situation the country finds itself in?
Situation is quite dire because we have a parliament that is by and large useless. It's like a bored teenager on a long drive, and it knows what it doesn't want, and it's so bored with Brexit, but it can't agree. So no matter what you put up, it's against it. Are you in favour of a referendum? No, I don't want that. Are you in favour of remaining within the single market? No, I don't want that. Are you in favour of... No, I don't want to do that. No. And are you in favour of leaving without a deal? No, we don't want to do that. So it's against everything, but there isn't enough votes to be in favour of something. And it could be by the time this podcast goes out that Boris has started on the process of the bill, because we'll be voting on that today. But even then, what people don't seem to understand, this is not the end of Brexit.
Right.
This is barely opening the door of Brexit. We've got years of negotiations about trade agreements, relationships with Europe, putting down pieces of legislation. We get our agriculture, our fisheries, our financial services into place. Brexit is going to go on and on and on and on.
Forward to it.
I'm sure we are.
Now, the question is, I should actually remind listeners that we are talking on the day that the second reading of the European Withdrawal Act will take place. So, as we speak, we don't quite know. As, well, perhaps like the government front bench, don't know what's going to happen. You compare Parliament to a petulant teenager. What do you do to a petulant teenager to sort it out? Is there a chance that it will see sense and push this through this bill without wrecking amendments? Is there a chance it will vote for its own for a general election? How do you see this playing out at the moment?
The sensible thing will be to put this deal through, because I've always been of the view a deal is better than no deal, because this is just the beginning. In order to start the process of Brexit, start the process of the United Kingdom taking over powers that it's not really exercised for 40 odd years, the smart thing is to get this thing through now. But in a way, it's not about Brexit itself. If there was a free vote, this deal would have gone through. Mrs May's deal would have gone through. But it's about politics. It's about a Labour Party that thinks it has a chance, trying to make the Prime Minister, whether it was Theresa May or Boris Johnson, look as though that they are in office but not in power, of delaying as long as possible. There's a lot of talk about an election in the autumn, maybe back end of November, beginning of December, something for us to look forward to before Christmas. It's beginning to look less likely. It's beginning to look as though they might want to drag it into spring to get as far away as possible from the rather decisive moment that Boris came back with a deal. We have to remind ourselves that nobody thought he could deliver a deal, and it has quite shocked them. And if you remember, all this process went through in order to ensure that we're left without a deal. When we have a deal, suddenly, oh no, it's not that kind of deal. We don't want that kind of deal. We want something different.
I think the vast majority of people in this country, whether Remain or Leave, now would be very satisfied for this to come to a amiable conclusion. And as correctly just said, because when it does come to those in the opposition who claim to want this to end, and then introduce wrecking amendments, they introduce new objections to it, the general public are getting quite frustrated.
But you've got to understand that quite a lot of people don't get beyond a small area within Westminster, sometimes a cliche referred to as the Westminster bubble, and go back to their own patch. Now, by and large, everybody hates their MP, except when they're at home, doing the fairs, wandering around, helping people. So they, in a way, they're cosseted to that great, which I feel is coming as a tsunami of change.
You were, of course, MP for Brentwood for
25 years.
Absolutely. What would you? I mean, of course, you president there as well, despite being a proud Yorkshireman, obviously representing a good Essex seat. What would you say to your old constituents right now? Hang in there; it'll be all right.
Well, it's different when you're a member of Parliament, because you've got to kind of toe the government line a little bit. So one thing I found now is I've got my weekend back and I say what I want, and I think I always say to our constituents is that it is pretty hopeless down there.
Excellent. Well, on that, I think, honest assessment, it's something I think the Parliamentary Review has always done quite well, talking frankly about problems, issues, and also not just good practice, but leadership.
Well, I was used to read it when I was a member of Parliament, because, what you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences, and I've always sort of found it quite a kind of a chatty magazine, but also you would see things that you would not automatically have come across. I certainly have attended the receptions over the year, and it's amazing the things you kind of pick up.
And I think it's important to stress it's not because politicians are uninterested, because honestly, as you all know more than anyone, it's an issue of time. and to be able to have a channel and a platform where you can keep communication lines between businesses, schools, and policymakers is so exceptionally important.
No, I think so, and and it's important that it's beholden to nobody. People, pay to be part of the publication, pay to be members, and it's a way of not being beholden to government, not beholden to anything.
Now, echoing the words, of course, your fellow chairman, Lord Blunkett, has said, what some might not know is that you started your political journey perhaps even further left than David Blunkett.
Absolutely, I was a communist.
Now, what was it?
At the age of 14, I was bought the Trotsky's History of the Russian Revolution, and I read it from cover to cover. I tried to read it a few years back, and I just couldn't follow anything.
Oh, so I was going to say perhaps you might know the minds of the show front bench better than they do themselves.
From my position when I first joined, I would regard them as recalcitrant running dogs of the capitalist system.
Now, what was it then that moved you from radical Marxists to running the only inner city council controlled by the Conservatives in the 80s?
Well, I was very young, and I was fascinated by what was happening in what was then Czechoslovakia and Dubček, and the revolution that was taking place there inside communism, and the way in which he was repressed by Mr. Brezhnev, and the tanks and taking over. I was so angry. I'm 16, remember. I'm really angry. I thought, what's the most outrageous thing I can do? I will join the Conservative Party as a protest. And I kind of sticked around, and my family thought it was the funniest thing that ever happened to it. I was Eric the Tory. And
I think you announced this quite grandly as a grand protest.
I did indeed, but I kept going down, and it was an exciting time. People were developing the ideas of what the Conservative Party should be. Selsdon man, even Heath looked radical. We had different ideas, and it eventually clicked. And at some point, I became a Conservative, and that was 51 years ago. I think I'm definitely 100% a Tory now.
Through and through.
Through and through.
Although I do know the story, most people might guess that a dynamo Conservative like yourself would have perhaps a portrait of Mr. Thatcher or Mr. Churchill in their office. But who is it that you have?
I had Che Guevara. Which I always had him over my left shoulder for visitors, and they always used to you see their eyes going up and thinking, who can't possibly be it. Someone asked me if it was Desi Arnaz. I felt it was married to Lucille Ball. But no, the reason I did that was to remind me and to remind my officials that without constant vigilance, the cigar-chomping commies would take over.
I'm sure David Blunkett was in the room to reply to that, actually. But in that long journey, you eventually ended up, of course, in 2010, doing something most Conservatives would never thought they would have to do, but in a coalition government with, of all people, the Liberal Democrats.
That's right.
Now, something I think perhaps today more than ever, people and our politics seems to be almost wholly determined on how we voted in a referendum 3 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, the most normal thing would happen after something like that would be the country would come together, and if anything, we're more divided. I mean, I thought working in the coalition, I'm proud to have been part of that coalition. I'm proud to have worked alongside the Liberal Democrats, who I think realised that, like all minority partners in a coalition, they would suffer at the polls.
Do you think we've lost the ability recently as a people to work with those that we might disagree with on issues more than we used to?
I'm not sure that's right. I mean, you can see various members of the Conservative Party working closely with Liberal Democrats and Labour to defeat their own government, but it's not a thing I think I would want to encourage.
Quite. And I should remind listeners, we are recording this in Victoria, just over the road Cardinal Place, a fantastically new development site, which wouldn't have been there without some of your legislation. What was the proudest?
I personally approved it.
Absolutely. What was the proudest moment, do you think, in serving Secretary of State for 5 years?
It's my actual proudest moment. We did a thing called Troubled Families, which was the first centre-right attempt to deal with poverty and to deal with difficult families that were causing a disproportionately large amount of call upon the state, and it was on the basis of tough love. It's on the basis of getting people into jobs. It's about dealing with the kind of the family as a whole, not just one or two individuals that were having a problem. And I'm pleased that it's continued.
And since, I should very much stress, since of course you're stepped down to being an MP, you do have your weekends back, but that's not to say you haven't remained very active and very busy. Of course, continues the government's anti-corruption champion, shone the harsh light of day over malpractice in the local government. Indeed, the Queen's speech we've just had includes some of your recommendations from 2016. I think a couple of things on that. First of all, are you surprised, I may imagine you may not be, at some of the backlash towards, in this country, introducing voter ID for voting?
It is absurd, and it's particularly absurd coming from the Labour Party, because it was largely Labour's vulnerability that got my interest in trying to do something about it. And it's a bit like saying, you're requiring people to show some ID, that this is suppressing voting. It's a bit like saying the post office is suppressing parcels because they demand to see some ID. I think they've got a bee into their bonnet that this is something like that goes in the state to repress. It's not. It's about giving confidence to the system. Now, the Electoral Commission and foreign observers have warned us for such a long time that our electoral system is vulnerable. And it's to misquote John Major, we are really sort of old maids cycling to evensong and Warburn. Yeah, I mean, it's such a basic thing. It's an important thing. And it was kind of interesting in some of the trials. They did a focus group with a bunch of young Asian girls. And they said they thought the process of photo ID would actually give them a greater confidence in the fairness of the system. I make all kinds of recommendations to stop postal vote harvesting, to stop various fraud taking place, to stop intimidation at counts, to stop intimidation outside polling stations.
And I think you referenced it earlier, the Westminster bubble. A lot of the places where this occurs and the places where this does go on are places where perhaps many members, many people in the press don't usually go to.
No, they don't. We saw a YouGov poll that said the overwhelming majority, well in the 60%, thought this idea was sensible.
Yeah, and I imagine you're quite proud that recommendation is in the speech.
Yes, I mean, I'm a bit frustrated they didn't do it sooner, but nevertheless, I'm very happy that they are doing it.
It's as if the government's time has been taken up by something else and we've not focused on anything domestic.
Absolutely.
But with a man, though, with his roots in local government, do you think, and how much you've worked with that report, especially looking at them carefully, how would you rate our current state of local municipal politics?
Local government's very good. I mean, local government, don't get me wrong, it's by and large corruption-free, and it does a remarkably good job. And it was, in truth, my worries about local government and that these measures were brought in. I don't believe the fraud is big enough to be able to take a parliamentary seat, but it is big enough to take a council. And if you are negligent, uncaring about the probity of the poll, you're likely to be equally negligent about the awarding of contracts to your friends. So it's all passed out. But local government is a very enduring part of our constitution. I got a bit of stick because we had to take some money from them, but by and large, they survive very well.
Excellent. Now, beyond obviously that work, you're also, of course, the British envoy for post-Holocaust issues.
Yeah, sure.
I think very dear to your heart. I know you've done some fantastic work recently, including with obviously former Shadow Chancellor from the Review, Ed Balls. Would you mind, if you could just let the listeners know what projects you are working on with that, and really the importance that has to so many communities around the country?
Well, I used to be very unpleasant about Ed Ball, and he used to be very unpleasant about me. But I found working with him remarkably easy, and we've not had a single row in 2 years, and by now we're beginning to be able to finish each other's sentences. We're building a memorial to the Holocaust next to Parliament with a learning centre below it, and the reason why the Prime Minister chose that site is that it was David Cameron, and he wanted to ensure that when people left the memorial, they would look and see Parliament and recognise that it was the last bastion against tyranny. But more important, to remind people who work in Parliament that the legislature has a choice. It can either protect its citizens or it can oppress its citizens. And we do know that that it was a compliant legislature that brought in the Nuremberg laws. And at a time when there are parts of Europe that are seeking to rewrite their history and seeking to see themselves as only the victims of the Nazis, I'm determined that we should tell the truth in an unblinking way. We are, I suppose, at a critical crossroads when the last survivor is likely to be no longer with us within the next decade and a half. And at that point, we do know that history starts to be reassessed. I think it was Simon Sharma that talked about this. And he was referring to the French Revolution. And of course, most of the books written in the 1850s are the ones that have shaped our view of the French Revolution. But the difference is this, that slightly over 100 years ago, my grandfather Edgar grabbed hold of his Lee Enfield and walked out of a trench in the Somme and walked towards the Germans. And within a few minutes, most of the people he'd been brought up with, most of his friends were dead. Nobody doubts that he did that. But there's a whole industry out there that doubts that the Holocaust took place. So that's why it's important that we help frame that narrative.
And you referenced as well, it's so important, especially at this time of history, so many years afterwards, that young people in schools get the correct education about it. How do we compare as a country in doing that compared to some of our European friends?
We I think, compare remarkably well, and particularly because we've got a mixture of things. We ensure through the lessons of Auschwitz that 2 pupils from every secondary school go to Auschwitz each year, that they have a preliminary meeting, a visit and a wrap-up. We ensure that Holocaust Day is remembered in January. Now, I can remember starting that, or I'm not starting it, but being part of a foot soldier of people that put it together. And, it was like one man and a dog, but now it's quite a massive, it's a massive event. So I think we are quite good at remembering that. I think where we perhaps do need to have a wider understanding is beyond the death camps. And we need to kind of understand the Anstaltgruppen, which was the roving murder squads, how important they were. You were more likely to have been shot in a ditch than to end up in a death camp. And the hinterland of that is Lithuania, where I was last week talking to colleagues, and through Belarus and the Ukraine. And it's really important that we ensure that we register where those death sites are.
And I think certainly, and I'm going to sit down next to speak, which hopefully won't be too long away, it's something I think we'd be very happy to keep updates on how that project is going, because it's so important and people do need to be aware of it. Looking to the future, though, I imagine you were actually very content and happy. The former Prime Minister, friend and colleague David Cameron just released his book, and you did quite unscathed from it.
I came out, he was very nice about
Yes.
it. I even bought the audio version because he was reading it, and he obviously, but there was a fair bit of affection, and I'm rather glad they left out one or two of the other embarrassing things.
Maybe another time.
Yeah.
That's, but it's important, I think, and I'm conscious of the time, but I think it's important that today people have become so perhaps caught up in what's happening in this country regarding Brexit. Looking to the future, what would you say that it's a positive thing that this country has to look forward to?
Well, we're a large trading nation. We're a large economy. We're a liberal democracy, and it will be good to get through Brexit over the coming years, and it will be good to start to look at some of the social issues that we need to tackle. Those have been left behind by our economic progress, and it will be good to see some solid investment in this country, both in terms of its infrastructure, but also in terms of the way it operates as a democracy.
And I know that's going to be a huge focus of the next review. Pickles, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
As always, it's been a pleasure interviewing and learning from our guests. I hope that you all enjoyed listening. Until next time, let's raise a glass to raising standards. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. You can find every episode on iTunes, YouTube, and Spotify. The views expressed by each guest in the podcast are their own. They do not represent the opinions of the Parliamentary Review, Westminster Publications, Lord Pickles, Lord Blunkett, David Curry, or any other guest on the podcast. If you'd like to know more about the Parliamentary Review, please visit www.theparliamentaryreview.co.uk.